Hello, my friend, it's Gina. Thank you for continuing the long journey in the effort to find justice for Elizabeth. This is an account that's based on a true story, one that, as of this recording, remains ongoing. Welcome back to Lost Sister, a Discarded Woman, Episode 17. Content warning: this and future episodes contain sensitive topics and may cause distress to some listeners. Hearing disturbing actions of oppression, manipulation, and abuse can bring up painful memories, personal struggles, and trauma for many. Narrators note the names have been changed and places are purposefully arbitrary to protect the privacy of those involved. This podcast is our way of telling Catherine and Elizabeth's story so that others can be aware of potential future issues. The central figures in our story include Catherine, her sister Elizabeth, Elizabeth's husband Walter, and Walter's granddaughter Darcy. Additional figures are Charles, Catherine and Elizabeth's elder brother and Elizabeth's legal guardian, and the attorney who represent Elizabeth's family, Alex. The podcast team and I are asking that if one of our listeners happens to know someone who might know someone with big media contacts, please share this podcast story. The FBI agent who's assigned to Elizabeth's case advised Catherine to try to emphasize the importance of public attention to this type of crime. Also, if someone in the media might be convinced to take an interest in this particular case as well. A quick recap of Episode 16. In an old Forbes article titled, "It's Okay to Hate Lawyers," it states, people hate lawyers because they represent the interest of people and corporations without really caring who they are, what they did, what harm they caused, or how culpable they are. Catherine filed 3 complaints against attorneys associated with Elizabeth's case to the State Bar Association. All 3 cases were closed because each attorney simply denied any misconduct. We also updated with the latest happenings in the civil lawsuit by Charles, acting as Elizabeth's guardian, versus Darcy. Darcy's game, if you will, is the let's run out the clock strategy. Delay, 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 hoping she can hold off any legal verdict until Elizabeth dies. She seems to believe that she can hold the courts at bay long enough that so when Elizabeth dies, Darcy will be totally free and in the clear. To be honest, that is the way it's going to play out, unless there is ever enough evidence to charge Darcy with criminal behavior that can be proven in court beyond a reasonable doubt. And what about Elizabeth? Well, as it stands right now, Elizabeth does not have the funds to be able to stay in the current facility for a year because that's how far out the judge scheduled the civil jury trial to begin. Did the judge take Elizabeth into consideration? Did they ask about her health? Her welfare? No, that isn't a surprise. She's just another old woman, a discarded woman. So much for justice for all, right? Well, now let's continue our story. Of course, the hope is that you have followed our story of Catherine and Elizabeth from the beginning. In case you haven't, I really do encourage you to do so. This episode is titled, "What the Hell Is This?" for the simple reason that still, to this day, Elizabeth's family, along with their attorney Alex, the police detective, Sam, the assistant county attorney, and the FBI agent assigned to the case, even with all of the evidence they've accumulated, they are still unable to charge Darcy with any type of criminal activity. Nothing. Nada. Sam finally admitted that the statute of limitations has run out for any of the potential misdemeanors they might have been able to charge Darcy with if they had moved on it immediately, instead of kicking that damn can down the road over and over again. Of this, I personally lay at the feet of the county attorney due to their inaction, incompetence, or quite possibly their purposeful obstruction. So let's regroup, starting with a simple overview, then following up with the basic timeline. From the day Catherine called her sister Elizabeth, which resulted in a disconnected landline, to learning that Elizabeth and her husband Walter had been moved from their home without a word to the complex manager, neighbors, friends, and certainly without any notification to Elizabeth's rather large family, throughout the agony of basically begging strangers to answer her through social media until finally finding Walter's granddaughter, Darcy. The amount of fear, anxiety, and distress Elizabeth's family have endured for months upon months upon months is staggering and totally unacceptable. The very fact that Darcy purposefully and strategically withheld Elizabeth's location for months, in my way of thinking, was more than overtly cruel. It's criminal. Especially on top of the fact that Darcy was certainly aware of Elizabeth's family, even knew exactly how to contact Catherine. Yet, Darcy has made blatant statements to the contrary. And that, my friend, is contemptible. And when the nightmare was just beginning. To preface our timeline, I'm going to add this. Over the years, Elizabeth and Catherine had phone conversations as often as possible, with Walter's mood regulating whether Elizabeth would be allowed to take the call as well as the length of the call. Elizabeth's way to bypass him would be to walk the grounds of their complex while also staying within range that their cordless telephone provided. That was the only way she was free to talk to whoever she wanted and as long as she liked. The last year or so before the move, and more than once, Elizabeth told Catherine that even though she, Elizabeth, knew she was fading mentally, Walter had finally agreed that the two of them would be moving to an assisted living facility that he had chosen near their current home. Elizabeth was very much looking forward to that move. For this very reason, Catherine wasn't overtly alarmed at the very beginning of her search for Elizabeth. Walter had probably decided that they would move and didn't give Elizabeth the opportunity to let Catherine know what was happening, which would not have been out of Walter's character at all. To continue our regroup, let's take a look at the base timeline of events that, personally, I find to be the most important points. New Year's of 2022, Catherine discovered Elizabeth's landline disconnected and began this search for her sister Elizabeth. In the early spring that year, we've pieced together these facts that occurred in the months between the move from their home and when Elizabeth was admitted to the hospital in the fall of that same year. Darcy facilitated a move for Walter and Elizabeth across 4 states without notification to anyone. Evidently, Darcy moved the couple into her own home for an unknown period of time. At some point, she admitted both Walter and Elizabeth into what we have designated as Care Facility Number 1, where we understand they stayed less than a month because Walter insisted that now he wanted his own house instead. Darcy moved Walter and Elizabeth into a house that was purchased in Walter's name. Of note, this house does not have wheelchair access, even though Walter is wheelchair bound. We have not been able to learn of any caretaker other than Darcy and her own claims that, well, she did have groceries delivered and she door-dashed some meals to them. Later that spring, Catherine locates Darcy via social media. 2 days after the initial contact, Darcy gives Catherine a phone number where the family can talk to Elizabeth. 1 week after that, the number was disconnected. In early fall of that year, it's still 2022, Walter transferred over $4.5 million to an account in his name alone. 5 weeks later, Elizabeth suffered a dislocated shoulder, the third time since they moved. She was taken to the ER, and Elizabeth was admitted to the hospital for surgery to repair her shoulder. That very same day, Darcy made a statement to the hospital, and per the hospital records, it states, quote, "Walter and Elizabeth aren't capable to make decisions," unquote. The following day, the very day of Elizabeth's surgery, over $1.5 million was transferred from an account in Elizabeth's name to an account held in Walter's name. Days later, and just a few days before Thanksgiving, Elizabeth is admitted from the hospital to what we call Care Facility Number 2. 2 days after Elizabeth is moved to Care Facility Number 2, Walter suddenly has a new will, naming Darcy his sole beneficiary, cutting out his wife, Elizabeth, completely. Elizabeth spends the holidays and the next 6 months in Care Facility Number 2. No family visits, and she was even told they were all dead or that they just didn't want to visit her. But she was safe, and at least the staff are extremely kind. But this facility itself is very basic, and it's just not right for someone with Elizabeth's long-term care needs. By early spring the following year, Darcy is divorced. 1 week after the divorce is final, Darcy forms an LLC. And the very next day, Walter's estate is transferred to Darcy. The following day after that, which just happens to be 9 days after her divorce, it's also 128 days after Elizabeth went to the ER, Walter is dead. His bank account is transferred to Darcy with the known assets of $4.7 million. Probate is filed the same day, with Darcy indicating that Walter only had $50,000 in assets. 2 days after his death, Walter is cremated, and as far as we know, there was no funeral, at least a public one. But we do know that Elizabeth did not attend a funeral or a memorial service. 11 days following Walter's death, which of note, no one in Elizabeth's family is aware of Walter's death, I contacted my personal attorney. I was looking for advice on how to locate a private detective. Instead of the advice, my attorney informed me that their law firm couldn't help Catherine or her family because there would be a conflict of interest, which could only mean Darcy was one of their clients. I did share Catherine's contact information with my attorney in the hopes that Darcy might reach out. In early summer of that year, 2 months after Walter's death, Walter's estate is transferred to an account of Darcy's, which is immediately transferred to her LLC. Of note, Walter's estate now consisted of all, and I do mean all, of the assets of the couple combined. The accounts had been funneled to a single account in Walter's name alone. 1 week following the transfer of all of those funds, Darcy files for and is appointed as Elizabeth's guardian. In her filing, she stated that Elizabeth had no family and that Elizabeth's only assets is her monthly Social Security check. Later that very same day, Darcy contacts Catherine with Elizabeth's physical location. Go figure. 2 days later, Darcy purchases a home in the amount of $850,000 in cash. Now it's midsummer, about a month later, and Catherine was granted guardianship of Elizabeth by the court. Darcy did not attend that hearing, even though she was notified per the state's legal instructions. Within 3 days, Catherine was able to get an appointment with the doctor who was now Elizabeth's physician of record. When questioned, not only was the doctor unaware of the medications, including memory care meds that Elizabeth had been taking for years, but they also admitted that they took Darcy at her word that Elizabeth had end-stage dementia. Nor was the doctor informed that Elizabeth was a retired physician herself or that she had suffered from celiac disease her entire life. Whether Darcy was truly unaware of some of this or withheld vital information intentionally, we may never know. The doctor did re-prescribe the memory medication Elizabeth had been taking for years, thankfully. Just shy of 1 month after Catherine was appointed guardian, Darcy takes the family back to court to challenge guardianship and is named guardian once again on a ludicrous technicality. Darcy immediately takes away Elizabeth's memory care medication, again, and she blocks family members from visiting Elizabeth. It takes the next 3 months, a couple of judges, multiple hearings, and another move for Elizabeth to a new care facility for the family to regain guardianship. This time, Charles was appointed as guardian due to the fact that he lives in the same state as Elizabeth. The judge did remove Darcy permanently as guardian and conservator and ordered a full accounting of Darcy's conservatorship within 20 days to the court. I'd like to note she has never fully complied with that court order. As we said, this is just an overview and a base timeline of what is considered to contain enough damning leads to move forward with a criminal investigation. I'm going to say these facts straight out, friend. Number 1, by Darcy's own admission, both Elizabeth and Walter had diminished mental capacity for years. Elizabeth has now been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and Walter's death certificate states his cause of death was due to cerebral dementia. Neither of these diseases happen overnight. There is no way in hell that either of them was capable of making sound judgments, period, let alone signing any type of legal paperwork, including buying property, legally signing a new will, or to move vast amounts of money. Number 2, whether you care about Elizabeth, Walter, Catherine, or Darcy as anything other than arbitrary characters in a story, what every single person in America should give a damn about is that it certainly appears that Darcy, acting on her own, set up and carried out a plan to divest 2 old people of their life savings, to leave them basically destitute, to become wards of the state. Their care dependent on our tax dollars for the rest of their lives. That's right, it's a con. It's called Medicaid fraud. The intent was that our Elizabeth, the brilliant young woman who was determined to become a doctor during a time when women were expected to do no more than marry, have children, and become the happy homemaker, The woman who, after working decades as a much-loved and respected doctor, made a painful decision to retire much earlier than she wanted because she became aware of her own mental decline, but who also knew she had saved and invested wisely and could retire early and live out her days comfortably, knowing she wouldn't be a burden on her family or society. In her will, Elizabeth left her wealth to her spouse if she predeceased him, which, with his age and health, was not likely. But if he were to outlive her, Elizabeth's understanding was that upon his subsequent death, the remainder would go to Elizabeth's beloved university. Number 3, lucky for Darcy that Walter died when he did, right? There wasn't much to deal with after. Maybe a few final medical bills, a cremation, and the fact that there wasn't a funeral sure didn't eat into Darcy's newfound wealth. To this day, she even believes that the little house that Walter bought belongs to her too. Now, it's by no means an $850,000 house, mind you. It's much more average than that, although she has offered a third of the value to Elizabeth. How kind. A third? What a succubus. Which, if Charles took her up on that offer, the proceeds might pay for maybe 3 months in the care facility. Gee, they should just kiss her feet for that. I hear you. I do. Just those few facts alone should warrant a full-on investigation, right? And as we have repeated time and time again on this podcast, there have been what seems to be deliberate legal roadblocks that appear to be completely unnecessary. For most of us who are fully invested in this case, we believe there have been indisputable obstruction by denying necessary subpoenas required to investigate properly. Once again, we are asking that if you care about any and all of the Elizabeths everywhere, share this story. Maybe together we can find someone who will care too. Someone who just might care enough to elevate our Elizabeth to a height that many, many more will be seen as well. Right now, there are so many things happening on the legal front. Hopefully, we'll have good news to report in episode 18. Abuse in all forms is an equal opportunity instrument of control, regardless of age, gender, IQ, education, or socioeconomic status. Whatever your age, for your own sake and those who care about you, please establish a living will. Keep it somewhere your chosen caretakers can access it. And if you don't have your assets in order, make plans right now to do so. Talk to an attorney and or an investment institution you trust and make it happen before it's too late. The terms elder abuse, elder neglect, and elder fraud are relatively new. In general, elder abuse is a term referring to any knowing, intentional, or neglectful act by a caregiver or any other person that causes harm or a serious risk of harm to a vulnerable elderly person. Legislators in all 50 states have passed some form of elder abuse prevention laws. A good place to start for more information is the website justice.gov/elderjustice. And if you suspect elder abuse, there is help. The National Elder Fraud Hotline is 1-833-FRAUD-11. That's 833-372-8311. The National Adult Protective Services Association, or NAPA, website is napsa-now.org. A fantastic resource is the National Center on Elder Abuse. Their website is ncea.org. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-799-SAFE. That's 800-799-7233. These links and phone numbers are also located on the Lost Sister webpage, lostsister.buzzsprout.com. Please follow our Facebook page, Lost Sister, a Discarded Woman podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, follow, subscribe, and share with your family and friends. By gaining a wider audience, we hope to bring attention to not only Elizabeth and Catherine's story, but to shine an enormous light on all domestic abuse, elder abuse, domestic violence, and elder fraud. We are still hoping one of our listeners knows of someone who could help hold that spotlight, someone with a wide audience, especially in the media. We truly believe that so much more must be done to protect the vulnerable in our society. Our hope is by sharing Elizabeth and Catherine's story might help others to avoid the same happening to them or someone they love. Thank you.